A million salutations at thy petaled feet, O lotus of light. I pour out my heart's love before thee. I pour out my whole being. I offer the fragrant musk of my soul at thy feet of omnipresence. O precious, blessed one, pipe the song of thy bliss in the dark bower of my heart. I am thy very own, ever shall I be thy own. I will laugh at all dangers, for thy protecting love fills the golden chalice of my constant remembrance of thee. I cast every earthly passion and pleasure into thy sacrificial fire as an oblation of my devotion to thee. In thy blessed light I will illuminate all shadows and expose as illusory my imaginary fears. In thy radiant light I will remain awake forever, entranced by thy thrilling, omnipresent bliss smile through all eternity. May thy love shine forever on the sanctuary of my devotion, and may I be able to awaken thy love in all hearts. Oh, make my soul thy temple, make my heart thine altar, and make my love thy home. And this next one is the imprisoned bird of omnipresence was released. The opened door of meditation released the caged bird of omnipresence. It fluttered, then spread its wings, and flew up and outward over infinite spaces. Its joyful song brought peace to every unhappiness-scorched being. Alas, unaccustomed to its newly found freedom, the soaring bird remembered the little cage that had enclosed it in old ways. It flew back, hopped inside, and folded its wings, hiding again, safely, as it thought, with its illusory security. O bird of eternity, take heart, break out forever from that little prison of imaginary security, and soar up to thy barless home in everything. And this is from Rays of the One Light by Swami Kriyananda, Parallel Commentaries on the Bible and Bhagavad Gita. This week's reading is entitled Reason versus Intuition. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. Jesus, when addressing his critics, appealed to reason and common sense. In his training of the disciples, however, he, like all great masters, encouraged them in the development of a higher faculty, soul intuition. For it is only by intuition that spiritual perceptions are achieved. In chapter 16 of the Gospel of St. Matthew, we find Jesus drawing on the intuition of his disciples by asking them who they thought he was in reality. They immediately understood that what he wanted from them was a subtle answer, not some obvious reply based on his nationality, sex, and the like. Peter it was who at last understood and answered the question on its intended level, the spiritual. "Thou art the Christ," he said, "the Son of the living God." And Jesus turned to him, saying, "Blessed art thou, Simon, son of Jonah, for not by human nature was this truth revealed to thee, but by my heavenly Father. And I tell thee this also, thou art Peter, which is to say, a rock. And upon this rock will I build my church, and never will the powers of darkness overwhelm it." Jesus was pleased with his disciple for relating to the question on its deepest level. Reason could not have given Peter that answer. The answer came through the faculty of soul intuition, and proved him thereby to be a spiritually advanced disciple. It was his intuitive perception, that insight which cannot be shaken by tempests of reasonable doubt, that Jesus praised in referring to him as a rock. The, quote, church he referred to next was the edifice of cosmic consciousness. Any outer church institution would have to depend, as in fact the Christian churches have always done, on the level of it, on the level of understanding of its individual leaders and members. Peter's intuitive perceptions could never have been passed on to an outward succession of prelates. Clarity comes by direct soul perception. Confusion results from excessive dependence on reason as the guide to understanding. As the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita states, "When your intellect, at present confused by the diversity of teaching in the scriptures, becomes steadfast in the ecstasy of deep meditation, then you will achieve final union with God." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om. This is such an important topic, reason versus intuition, and it takes on many levels, or many different levels of applicability to our lives as we grow on the spiritual path. In the beginning, before we take up the spiritual path in earnest, and for simplicity, I'll just start that from, when we came onto this path, though of course we may have been on other paths before, and in any case, every individual's experience is unique, and yet there are certain threads that we can draw out that can hopefully prove helpful. We may have had a certain amount of intuition already, and at least speaking for myself, I didn't have a teaching on intuition. I didn't even really, I don't know if I even knew the word. And so, not having a context for intuition, I followed what all of society was crying out for, which was reason, rational thought, provable conclusions, repeatable experiments, and so on. Now, excuse me, this is not wrong in the sense that the reading, of course, was telling us that intuition is the much higher faculty, and so it is. Even you could say that in some ways it's the scientists who hold out reason as the ultimate in the search for truth, and yet all of the great scientists have very openly said that their great discoveries came intuitively. Whether they put it that way, using that word, or saying it came as a flash of light, or it came all in an instant, or as one physicist, Richard Feynman, said that he was looking at this one equation and trying to figure it out, and then he just tapped it mentally, and the whole thing unfolded and revealed itself to him. He was solving the equation, the first one to solve the equation for the first time. And it was interesting because in an interview he said, "I remember everything about that moment. I remember the sound of how the pencil sounded as it scratched on the paper. I can remember the feeling right now of the texture of the paper, of how the pencil felt in my hand, of the smell of the pencil and the paper. Everything is so vivid, and I can instantly recall that moment." That is the sign of a superconscious experience, an intuitive experience. In some ways, you can say they're the same thing, intuitive and superconscious. And so that it gives such a vivid impression that it's easy to recall to the memory, not like our conscious experiences or conscious impressions, which are sort of, even to think about, now what did we do last Saturday? I think it was no, well, it's not fair. I happen to remember it was the Mahasamadhi retreat. Maybe you remember too. But the Saturday before that, no, okay, well, let me see. So that was the 20. You see, it's all kind of vague. Even what did we have for breakfast 2 days ago? You can say that's easy. I always have idli. Fine. But you can imagine that it might not be easy to answer some kind of question like that. This waking consciousness is still a bit of a dream, has some dreamlike qualities. It's not always easy to remember. And so, or even to call to mind, and certainly not vividly. Whereas a superconscious experience is very easy to recapture. It's burned into the mind, you could say. And Einstein, too, had a similar experience in discovering that the speed of light was constant. He just had a flash of insight where he just saw that it had to be. And then he spent 10 years working out the mathematics to prove that it should be, based on what we had known till then. And then it was only then that the experiment could be fashioned to prove that light bends around the sun or something like that. I don't remember exactly. So it did have to still be verified outwardly. But it began with intuition. And so why is it that science pushes so hard on reason? And in fact, some scientists, or even some people wedded to reason, I don't want to single the scientists out unfairly, is that they say you can't just talk about something you thought up or that occurred to you or that you feel. You have to prove it through reason, and we have to find that the answer is reasonable, and so on. Now, what is that in reaction to? Why be so adamant about it? Well, partly because science has built its strength, which, is quite a lot. I'm only able to speak to you right now because of the wonders of science and technology, so we should be grateful. But it has all come from long ago, meaning whatever it was, 500 years ago or so, this breaking away from science, breaking away from asking questions, studying things that it could not prove. And a lot of statements were made about reality, especially in the Western world, from religion, that were not easy to verify. And a lot of them were sort of not even clear how you would verify. There was actually a debate raging at one time over how many angels could dance on the head of a pin. I don't know that even one angel would want to dance on the head of a pin. I imagine that would be rather painful, actually, for the poor angel. But in any case, I dare not enter into that debate, which has, I'm sure, some infinite relevance. But the scientists said, forget all that. Let's just start with things that we can measure. For example, distance and speed and weight, or mass. Starting just with those, let's see what we can then observe and confirm, and not base it on feeling or belief, but base it on verifiable facts. How do we get to verify those facts? Well, we have to use logic. We have to use reason to say that if this is true, then these other things can be true, and so on. And so look at all that has come from that. It's really, in its own way, magical seeming. And we can say, and of course it's not magic, it's very clearly easy to, prove, and it's all been spelled out, but really. Even Einstein's theory of relativity that I was just mentioning, how many of us really understand it? I'm certainly not among them. And so it's just sort of, we've heard that someone else understood it, and he said that he understood it, so therefore it's understandable. And we all agree that so many understand it, or you see, it still ends up being, until you've, done it yourself, we are still taking it on faith. So, but anyway, I leave that aside. So it's understandable, given how much science and, in general, rational, logical thought has achieved, and that it was also done in reaction to the sort of blind belief or untested conclusions those aren't useful either, and that's not what intuition is saying. But in especially Kali Yuga, in the sort of darker age, the intuition was sort of clouded over, and reason also didn't work all that well, and so, but at least it worked somewhat. And so it's natural that if somebody who's coming from a very rational approach sees intuition, that they're only familiar with an irrational approach in the sense of a lower level of clarity. And so it's understandable that they might push against that. However, intuition can also be irrational in the sense of being beyond rational, in the sense that it is a higher level of clarity. But remember that if something is true, then it is true on all levels. And so a conclusion that you may reach intuitively, still, you should be able to find a way, even as Einstein did, to make rational steps to reach that conclusion from common understanding. In other words, suppose you have an intuitive idea of what the right course is to do in something. In presenting that idea to others, it may be more helpful to build up your argument or your point through rational, logical steps that they can follow, rather than saying, obviously we should do it because I had the intuition. You see, it's not fair then, because then it's just my intuition versus your intuition or whatever, and it actually becomes a little bit just my, as Haridas Ji from Ananda Bangalore put it, when he was serving with one other person on a project, he discovered to his amazement that there were two God's wills. That he was saying, I feel it's God's will we do this, and the other was saying, I feel it's God's will we do just the opposite. So the idea then is to not bludgeon people with our intuitions. We may have arrived at our conclusions in a very different way than the way we present it, you see. This is important in general, whether intuition or reason or anything else, not to think of what I'm trying to say only, but also the other person's reality, their receptivity. Are they open to it? Is this even necessary to say? As Swamiji pointed out at one point, for reducing our level of ego, overcoming the ego. He said, don't correct someone if they make a mistake, meaning even just this trivial thing like they say the wrong word in a sentence. If you know what they mean and they know what they mean, don't bother to correct them. He said, unless if you feel it's important enough, then make sure that you make it clear that you know that they are interested in the truth just as you are, and do it also very tentatively, because in fact, they may not be the ones needing the correction. I can't tell you the number of times that when I first came on the path, I had this unconscious habit of correcting people. Other people were very conscious of the habit, but I was just sort of doing it automatically. I know what you mean. You mean this, and so on. And I found to my surprise that I was wrong a lot of the time. Actually, no, that wasn't the thing at all. I was just so sort of confident of whatever flashed into my head, and it very often wasn't the case. And Swamiji pointed out that once when he was with Master, Master was saying something, and Swamiji, he paused, and Swamiji finished the sentence for him. And he said, Master looked at him for a moment and then finished his sentence in a different way. And Swamiji said, it's good to be enthusiastic, but let's not just sort of burst out of ourselves with enthusiasm and let the other person finish their thought. So the idea then of intuition as a higher level of perception really is only something you can come to once you've experienced it. Now, before the spiritual path, as I started with, we may have had intuitive flashes. We were yogis before we knew it. So we were still using definitely those yogic skills that we had developed in past lives. We just may not have known what to call them, or we may not have been fully aware of what was going on. And so the intuition, the feeling that this is a good direction to go in, this is not a good direction to go in. This is a good person to become friends with, this isn't. Sometimes we would get an intuition perhaps that put us to move in a certain direction that turned not to work out. This is a problem you find with people who are, this is a problem people find who are very intuitive, so they think. But remember, no matter that, if we follow something full bore, full speed ahead, without still checking in to see if there's a second intuition and a third intuition, if God actually had a list of things to share with us, we heard the first thing and ran, and he said, wait, but we were gone, well, then we may find ourselves running head first into a wall. And so, as I said, sometimes people can be intuitive, but then it doesn't work out, and they realize, I didn't get the whole picture. I didn't get all the information. And so we learn to go back to listening, and we also learn not to be too proud of receiving the intuition and then running away from the source of the intuition. Why not stay close to, whether it's God or our soul or our higher self that is giving us this guidance? Stay with it. Why do we need to, be on our own? It's no fun. And so the idea then that we might have had some intuition too in getting answers to questions. I had a friend who was very intuitive when it came to math, and his way of solving math problems, we would sometimes have math problems that we would sort of look at together on the whiteboard. He would say, well, let's say the answer is such and such. And then he would prove that that was the answer. It was just, it's much easier once you have an answer to prove that it works than to figure out or derive the answer. And so I was so in awe and so, frustrated at the same time that, how do you do that? Just maybe it's this, and then show that it is. So anyway, I had another friend who was intuitive in the same way, except that his reasoning was often wrong when he was trying to prove the answer. It was right, but meaning the answer was right, like it was 26. That was the answer. But the way he explained it was completely wrong, but still it was 26. So anyway, we may have these flashes of intuition, but when we start to meditate, then we find our intuition grows tremendously. In fact, Master said the easiest and best way to develop intuition is to sit long in the silence after practicing the meditation techniques. This is why we emphasize this, that, as he did, that we should practice our techniques for, say, 2/3 of our meditation time, and then leave the last 1/3 of the time in silence. So maybe you practice, Hong Sao for 15 minutes, Om technique for 15 minutes, and then silence for 15 minutes to make sure that there's time after the technique, as he said, to enjoy the after effects of meditation. This is when your intuitive ability is increased. Now, it doesn't mean necessarily that in that 15 minutes, that's when all of your intuitive insights will occur. It may seem that nothing's happening during that time, but you will find that later in the day, perhaps, there'll be a little hint of something, or you'll, not even intentionally, you'll do the right thing and only later say, oh my gosh, I don't even know how and why it occurred to me to do that, and yet look how it worked out. And you may find also by comparison, when we don't do that, when we don't give enough time after the meditative techniques, or don't give enough time for the meditation at all, that somehow we're kind of lumbering through life and banging into things and nothing quite works out. All of that effortless flow that we had is all just gone. And sort of, what happened today? Well, it must be something in the stars. Well, it's something in this star that we didn't spend enough time looking for in the morning. And so, easy enough, then just meditate at night. It's easy enough to come back. And so, so again, our intuitive power increases. And one point I wanted to make is there is no substitute for intuition. As Swamiji was saying in the reading, intuition is our highest faculty. It can see far beyond reason. And Master defined intuition as the soul's power of knowing. In fact, the soul's power of knowing God. So it is, do we want to use our power of knowing God? I do. I'm sure you do. And that power is intuition. And again, it's a quality of the soul. It's not a quality of the ego. So that also gives us something, that this is a inherent and, as spiritual as it gets, quality or power. And so another way that intuition is explained compared to, for example, logic is, as Master put it, and Swamiji has described many times, the three aspects of consciousness: the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, and the superconscious mind. The conscious mind's tool, or sort of power of whatever, finding things out, is logic, reason. Okay, so that sort of makes sense in terms of how we can live our lives on the conscious mind, rational level. The subconscious mind, its tool is habit. And so this is a useful thing when we have certain procedures that we've learned or ways of doing things. Then we may have had to work hard at first to learn them, such as driving a vehicle or cooking a certain thing, a certain dish, or other things, that at first we had to really concentrate, but then once we know how to do it, we just do it automatically, and it comes out fine because it's a habit now. And this saves us a lot of time and frees our mind to think about other things and learn other things. And so it's useful. As Master said, it's helpful to have a routine that you follow each day. So I don't know what he said about why to do so, but also one reason I think is because it does free our mind from having to, if we do things sort of in a chaotic way, we may have to spend more energy doing it. Whereas if we follow a pattern, then it sort of consumes less energy, mental energy and otherwise. He also said, do something new every day. And so that is also to balance it, lest we become just in a groove and a rut, and every day the same thing, open the newspaper or click on the newspaper, and on and on and on. No, so do something new every day, and it's fun. That's a fun thing I like to try to do, to come up with something new to do each day. Or if something happens, and even if it's somewhat disagreeable, I console myself, well, do something new every day. And so at least that gets us, gets that in for the day. So the intuition, the subconscious mind's tool is habit, the conscious mind's tool is reason, and the superconscious mind's tool is intuition. So again, it's our highest faculty. And as I was saying, there's no substitute for it. And what I mean is that after we've been on the path some time, we may find we're much more intuitive than we used to be. In fact, we have a much clearer mind than we used to. And it's intuition and meditation certainly help your use of logic also. So it isn't as if they are at odds with one another. Let me finish this other thought that I was in the middle of before I started this thought. So one thing I wanted to point out about, I said if we intuitively come to something, then we present it in a logical way to a person rather than just saying, no, it was my intuition. But we take into account, from their point of view, building up from something they already understand to where we are trying to go. That if we have an intuition, and we can't understand the logical steps of where it comes from, we should not be afraid to try to find a logical way to connect it. We should seek, in fact, that it have some kind of, if not immediately logical connection, that there should be some logical support for it as well. Now with a master, sometimes so many steps of logic are skipped in between that it's just impossible to see, except over time, how that could actually, what that statement of the master's could be true. And as with Swamiji, we always found that it was true, and Master too. He said of Master that whenever Master made too big of a leap and he wasn't sure, it always turned out that Master was right. But my point also is to say that if we have a thought, and if we challenge the thought ourselves or someone else challenges it, we should be calm and relaxed, because we should always be seeking above all the truth. Whether through logic, whether through intuition, it is the truth that we want. And as Swamiji said, truth is not afraid of questions. And so we shouldn't, no, this is my precious intuition. I just can't, expect it to conform to the sort of dry air of logic. Well, no, if it's true, it should hold up under scrutiny. Now, I'm not speaking of perhaps your intuitive experiences of God and your closeness and connection that you might feel with your guru. That is a precious thing, and that isn't something to parade out in front of everybody for them to either fawn over and worship or to poke fun at. Definitely not. That's a different thing. But I'm saying something that's a little more sort of prosaic, we should not hesitate to submit any thought that we have to questioning. Not criticism, not doubt, but intelligent and friendly questioning. And furthermore, as I say, if somebody is questioning us, we should be calm about that. We may choose how we respond to that person in a different way. I don't mean differently than calm. I just mean that we have to take into account that whole reality. But in ourselves, we should not be afraid of questions, because we only want to know the truth. But again, the kindly truth, not the truth that, yes, I really am so terrible or anything like that. That is not the truth. So, to come back, the thought that we have been on the path for a while, now we've meditated, now we know, yes, I follow my intuition, and I know to keep listening in case there's more intuition, and then we also have our logic to go along with it, and we're more logical than we used to be, and so on. Fine. But remember, there's always more. You see, one of the traps on the spiritual path is complacency, which is to basically be happy with what I have. And you could say, well, but isn't that contentment? Santosha, isn't that one of the niyamas? I mean, isn't that been called by the saints to be the supreme virtue? To be contented with what one has? Yes, that is contentment, or you could say, contentment in an upward direction. I'm at peace with what I have, but I'm using it also as a way to grow in peace and in God, versus I'm fine with what I have, so now I can go to sleep. You see, that is complacency. Contentment versus complacency. Just to basically become lazy, because I'm much more spiritual than I used to be, and I'm a lot more spiritual than, never mind. But you see, that sense of, well, I think I'm good enough now. And if we say such a thought out loud, we could probably catch it, so it sneaks in the background. So that thrill that we had in the early years of all the rapid, amount of progress, say, when all these different things were new, and so, oh, wow, that happened, oh, I went on this pilgrimage and had this experience, and then after a time they become familiar, and in all things in this world, there can sometimes be a sort of slogging period, or slogging periods, where in between very lovely experiences, in between there's just a lot of hard work. It doesn't have to be hard, it doesn't have to be dull, but very often it is, just the way the mind is, the personality. We don't know what kind of karma we're dredging up and digging our way through. It may not even be obvious that we are making progress. We are, but still, it may not be obvious as it was in the beginning. And so the thing to remember then is meditation, and especially Kriya Yoga, always help. You see, they develop our power of intuition greatly and increase that intuitive power, and there's no end to it. And we go on until we perceive God. And then, as Master said, there's no end to evolution. You go on until you achieve endlessness. Such a beautiful thought. So, with our Kriya then, I was thinking about it the other day, that what the difference between trying to perceive something with reason versus perceive something with intuition is that if we're trying to, for example, get perspective on a problem, reason is like standing on our tiptoes to be able to see a greater perspective on the problem, whereas intuition is like taking the elevator. Up the spine even, taking an elevator, taking an airplane. And so it's a lot more than just a little bit of a And so we can be pleased with ourselves, though. Oh, look, see how tall I am now. It's nothing. Not as a criticism, but as get in the elevator. And how do you do that? Kriya. It's just that simple. Meditate. And there is no substitute for that. We cannot will ourselves to see farther. As Master said, no mental openness or willingness can bring the experience of samadhi. It has to come through intuition, which comes through meditation. Now, in addition to meditation, it's wonderful to also keep connected with God, with Master, all day long. So having a communication with them, sharing what's on your mind with them, they're interested, and asking for advice and this and that. This will build intuition too, because even pausing to say, should I do this? Should I cut the Vengayam first, or should I cut the Takali first? Who knows why would to even ask such a question? But it gets us into the habit of asking, of listening, and you may find something useful out of it. Who knows? I can't think of an example of why it would be better. First, probably the Vengayam, because you have to cook them first. But anyway, never mind. The idea of sharing everything with God, being open that way, and knowing how much Divine Mother cares about you. One of the complaints sometimes of mothers is how their children have now grown up and just forgotten all about them. How do you think Divine Mother feels? My God. And so, it's like, well, let's make sure that we are kind and thoughtful to our own Divine Mother, and then we can see about these others. But, let us not be guilty of the same crime. And so just the wonderful thing too is she's omnipresent. As Master said, God is there throbbing in your heart. He's right within you. And so having that love, that trust, that openness, and having fun with God, having fun with Divine Mother. And it's not just that it has to be so grim that, okay, no, I'm very serious about the spiritual path. It is joyful. Someone once asked Swamiji, what is the mission of Ananda? And he said, it's to have fun. And then he went on to say, you have to understand what I mean and what I define as fun, which is, of course, what could be more fun than union with God? It's fun all the time. But still, I'm paraphrasing. His answer was not that. It was much better than that. But still, it was essentially that to have fun, rather than being too sort of self-important about ourselves or what we're doing. God is the only important thing in this universe, the only thing really in this universe. So keep that in mind, that as much as I have gained on the spiritual path, I can gain much more. And for example, if your life is going through all kinds of turmoil right now, don't worry about it. Just meditate a little bit more, which means a little bit more than zero if your meditation has fallen off, or a little bit more than before. Just not out of stress or pressure or guilt or I should or anything, but just saying, listen, I'm in a difficult time right now, and rather than trying to think my way through it only, or to try to claw my way through it through self-analysis or just sheer bludgeoning this problem with work, even outward work, let me also do some Kriya. Let me get to my center. Let me recharge my own batteries. Let me invite Master into my consciousness. And then from there, I'll be able to tackle this thing much more effectively. If nothing else, I will know that I'm not doing it alone, but I'm doing it hand in hand with Him. God bless you.